It was known as the Las Cuevas War. As wars go, it was not much of a war. It lasted about 24 hours. I would call it more of a dust-up between cattle thieves and a company of Texas Rangers. 40 Texas Rangers against 400 cattle thieves. Now the reason the incident is called the Las Cuevas War is because it happened at the border of Mexico and the United States. Now the strip of land between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River was contested between the Republic of Texas and Mexico. Mexico was willing to concede the border between Mexico and the Republic of Texas at the Nueces River. Texans, on the other hand, and the U.S. said it was the Rio Grande River located further south. Texas was admitted to the Union on December 29, 1845. President Polk sent troops into the Nueces Strip. Why? How else do you start a war and make it look like the other side started it? And the inevitable happened. Mexican troops attacked U.S. forces. President Polk could now get Congress to declare war on Mexico with a clear conscience. So, on April 25, 1846, the U.S. and Mexico were at war. 9 months later, on February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. The treaty established the Rio Grande as the border between the U.S. and Mexico, and Mexico agreed to recognize Texas as part of the United States. This area of land that was disputed by Mexico and the United States would become known as the Nueces Strip. By the mid-1870s, cattle ranches had settled within this strip of land. Now, with the border being so close, cattle rustlers would cross over the Rio Grande, steal the cattle, then cross back over with the stolen herd into Mexico without any fear of being prosecuted. Now, this is a story about a Texas Ranger who allegedly told the Secretary of War, "I shall remain in Mexico with my Rangers and cross back at my discretion. Give my compliments to the Secretary of War and tell him and his United States soldiers to go to hell." Well, that's one way to take down an obnoxious, narcissistic, officious bureaucrat. So, who is this amazing man? Leander Harvey McNally was born March 12, 1844 in Follansbee Brook County, Virginia. Now, McNally suffered from consumption as a child. Today, it's known as tuberculosis. So with the hopes that the climate would improve his health, his family moved to Texas in 1860. McNally helped his family raise sheep while he regained his health. On September 13, 1861, McNally enlisted in the Confederate States Army, joining F Company of the 5th Regiment of the Texas Mounted Volunteers under General Thomas Greene. Following fighting in the Battle of Galveston, McNally was sent to Louisiana, where he was given a commission on December 19, 1863, and he commanded 100 guerrilla scouts. McNally and his men were tasked with capturing Basher City, Louisiana. That's present-day Morgan City, I believe, where 800 Union troops were stationed. They were vastly outnumbered, but determined to take the objective. McNally devised a simple but effective ruse. After dark, he and his 40 troops marched back and forth across a long bridge that led to the city, shouting as if they were speaking to unseen generals and colonels. At dawn, McNally and his small force rode into the Union camp under a flag of truce and demanded an unconditional surrender. Now, the Union officers believed that the noise they heard signified a very large Confederate force, so they surrendered immediately. McNally was able to take all 800 Union troops prisoner. Now, you would think at least one of those Union officers would have sent out a patrol to find out what they were up against. McNally continued to serve the Confederacy until he was wounded in 1864 at the Battle of Mansfield. Now, he was sent home to recover, and during the last months of the war, he led mounted scouts working near Hempstead, Texas, to round up deserters, and his unit was one of the last Confederate Army units to be disbanded. Following the war, McNally moved to Brenham, Texas, where he married and had a son and a daughter. Now, McNally had established his reputation as a no-nonsense, get-the-job-done by any means available type of leader. So it was only natural when Governor Edmund J. Davis created the Texas State Police Force on July 1, 1870, that McNally was appointed one of its 4 captains. It was during this time period when an incident occurred that would cause the abolishment of this police force. Now, while McNally was escorting 3 suspects to jail, the 3 had managed to conceal a weapon. They opened fire on McNally. He managed to survive the gunfight but was wounded. In a newspaper interview after the event, he placed full blame on the local sheriff for not finding weapons. Now, by April 1872, the state police force was abolished due to corruption and incompetence. Texas was becoming a lawless state. Now, the Democratic Party regained control of Texas in 1873. They set about bringing law and order to the state. A new style of Texas Ranger was being developed. The newly elected governor, Richard Koch, created two branches of the Texas Rangers, a frontier battalion under the command of Major John B. Jones, and a designated special force commanded by McNally. Now, McNally's force was financed by cattle ranchers. McNally's special group had the specific task of bringing order to the 30,000 square miles of New Cess Strip, a hotbed of cattle thievery and banditry. McNally handpicked 40 men to form his company, and he headed into the Strip. The two biggest Mexican bandits at this time were Juan Nepomuceno Cortina, who had been a general in the Mexican army during the Mexican-American War. For years, Cortina had raided settlements in the Brownsville, Texas area, always retreating across the Rio Grande to avoid Texas law enforcement. Cortina was from a wealthy family that owned more than 260,000 acres. He commanded a force in excess of 2,000 armed Mexican outlaws and gunmen. He was above the law. Further north up the river, McNally was faced with a gang led by Juan Flores Salinas. This gang did not have the manpower of the Cortina's gang, but was nonetheless as ruthless. This gang was headquartered at Camargo, Mexico, directly across the border from the U.S. Cavalry outpost of Fort Ringgold near Rio Grande City. McNally and his men were going up against well-organized, well-armed forces of ruthless cattle rustlers who gave no thought to murder to get the stolen cattle over the border to Mexico. The article, Encounters with the Texas Ranger, 1876, published on the website eyewitnesshistory.com in 2007, explained McNally's philosophy and way of handling desperados and captured prisoners. He told his men in front of the relatives of the captured prisoner, quote, "If any of our prisoners attempt to escape or if an attempt was made to rescue them, we were to kill them without warning or mercy," close quote. The knowledge of this condition of the border prevented members of desperado gangs from attempting to rescue prisoners, for such an attempt meant instant death to the captive. Quote, "If you surrendered to McNally, you would live. If you decided to fight it out, you would most certainly die." The only law in the Strip was McNally's and his 40 Rangers. Now, by November of 1875, McNally had set up a successful network of paid informants among the cattle thieves, and it was in that month he received trustworthy information and an agreement was made to deliver 18,000 beeves, as he said, to a certain party in Monterrey, Mexico, on or before January 10, 1875. Between the dates of November 8, 1875 and November 24, 1875, close to 1,800 head of cattle had been stolen from the local ranchers in the Strip. McNally needed the U.S. Army to intervene on the border to stop the cattle rustling. However, U.S. troops were forbidden to cross the border to retrieve the stolen cattle. That would be an act of war. Now, unlike the Army, when McNally caught rustlers in the act of driving stolen cattle herds into Mexico, he didn't let diplomatic niceties or international borders or international law get in his way of doing his sworn duty. He went after them. McNally was okay using extra-legal means to get his job done, and that is exactly what he did on November 18, 1875. Captain Ranlett and 40 men of the 8th U.S. Cavalry from Fort Ringgold were patrolling along the Rio Grande River near Rio Grande City on the 18th of November when they spotted approximately 250 head of cattle being pushed across the Rio Grande River. Ranlett and his men had exchanged fire with the bandits but did not cross the border. Ranlett made the demand that the cattle be returned by the next morning or he would cross over and recover the cattle. Ranlett was bluffing. He was not authorized to cross the Rio Grande to retrieve stolen cattle. Instead, Ranlett sent word back to Fort Ringgold and Fort Brown for reinforcements. Major Clendenin set out from Fort Ringgold, located in Rio Grande City, Texas, just a few miles from the river and the fighting, with all available forces. while Major A.J. Alexander and 2 companies from the 8th Cavalry set out from Fort Brown. That's about 100 miles away, down by Brownsville. While Ranlett was following his orders, Captain Leander McNally, not bound by any such orders, formulated his plan to get the cattle back. By the afternoon of the 18th, Major Clendenin had joined up with Captain Ranlett as well as the rest of McNally's company. McNally told the officers he was going to cross over the river in the early hours of the morning, and he invited them along. Major Clendenin politely declined the invitation. He had a small problem. He had to follow his orders. Well, 1 a.m. on November 19, 1875, Captain McNally and his Texas Rangers crossed the Rio Grande and headed to Las Cuevas. This is a ranch 3 miles south of the river, about 12 miles below Rio Grande City and Fort Ringgold. Now, Las Cuevas was well known to McNally as the terminus for all cattle rustling in the area of the Strip. The ranch was controlled by General Juan Flores Salinas. Now, by 4 a.m., McNally and his Rangers were in position. The Atlantic Monthly online magazine's article, Cattle Raids on the King Ranch, written by Tom Lee back in May of 1957, states, McNally's orders were, quote, kill all you see except old men and women and children. These are my orders, and I want them obeyed to the letter, close quotes. McNally was not a man to be messed with. Now, the fight did not last long. With only 40 men, McNally quickly became outnumbered. He ordered his men back to the riverbank, but instead of crossing over under the protection of the guns of the U.S. Cavalry, the Rangers hid under the riverbank waiting. The wait was not long. 25 armed Mexican riders came galloping to the riverbank, ready to gun down the Rangers as they crossed back over to the U.S. side. Holding fire until the last second, McNally and his men opened up on the riders from their concealed position at the riverbank. The Rangers' volley of fire brought down 1 horseman. Now, as the Mexican riders pulled on their reins for their horses to move back under the cover of the brush, the Rangers continued firing as they moved forward. They reached the body of the dead man and discovered they had killed General Juan Flores Salinas. Now, once the Rangers broke up the Mexican attack, they retreated to their position at the riverbank. When the Rangers charged over the riverbank towards the Mexican formation, Captain Ranlett, violating orders, took 40 men to cross the river in support of the Rangers. McNally was unwilling to give up his fight. He wanted Ranlett and his troopers to join him in attacking Las Cuevas Ranch again. Ranlett refused. He said he would stay on the Mexican side of the river in support of the Rangers until he received orders to do otherwise. Now, throughout the day, the Mexicans and the Americans fought at the river. The Mexicans would charge the combined forces of the Americans, but each time they were repulsed with heavy losses. Major Clendenin and his troops on the U.S. side of the Rio Grande were able to use their Gatling gun as support for the Rangers and the captain and his men on the Mexican side of the river. By late afternoon, realizing they could not dislodge the Americans, a truce was arranged. Now, up to this point, the Mexicans had lost 80 men, including their leader, Juan Flores Salinas. Meanwhile, Colonel Potter, commander of the headquarters district, Rio Grande, had been receiving updates on the developing situation at the border and forwarding by telegram to the Adjutant General, Department, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Between November 18th and November 19th, the following telegrams were sent by Colonel Potter to the Adjutant General, Texas Department, San Antonio, Texas. Headquarters, District of the Rio Grande, Fort Brown, November 18th, 1875. To Adjutant General, Department, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Ranlett struck yesterday back of Las Cuevas train of 250 stolen cattle. Followed to the Rio Grande. Saw herd crossing and thieves on Mexican side hauling them out of the river. Demand made by him on Mexican authorities to surrender cattle and thieves, if not complied with this AM, has crossed into Mexico to recover them. Clendenin gone down to assist with all available forces from Ringgold. Alexander has just started with 2 companies for Las Cuevas. I made demands on Christopher for rendition of cattle and thieves. Line to Ringgold cut this morning. Potter, commanding. Headquarters, District, Rio Grande, Fort Brown, November 19, 1875. To Adjutant General, Department, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Cattle demanded by Clendenin have not been delivered. McNally's company joined Clendenin last night, crossed the river at 1 a.m. had a fight at daylight. Reports 4 Mexican killed, 400 Mexican in line, part of their regular troops. Clendenin seized the ferry boats at Camargo. Citizens of Camargo reported arming. I expect Alexander to arrive at Las Cuevas this p.m. Mails which left here yesterday morning for Corpus Christi reported robbed, 90 miles from here. Potter, commander. By 4:30 p.m., Major Alexander had arrived to bring more troops to bear on the situation, which was rapidly turning into the beginnings of a full-fledged war. Headquarters, District of Rio Grande, Fort Brown, November 19, 1875. Adjutant General, Department, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Alexander arrived at Las Cuevas. Reports that 40 men of 8th Cavalry crossed this morning before arrival by Randelet's orders. Clendenin, supporting McNally, was driven to the river by Mexicans. This was done in violation of my orders given by me yesterday. I have directed Alexander to return troops to the northern bank. He answered, it will be done immediately. I've carried out your other instructions in regards to notifying Mexican authorities and returning property. Alexander reports large numbers of troops are concentrating in front of him. McNally and his men are still on the Mexican side of the riverbank, and they were determined to stay there to retrieve the stolen cattle. McNally was not willing to leave. Even though a deal had been struck, he did not believe the Mexican authorities would return the stolen cattle on the following day. Randelet and his men were ordered back across the river. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander telegraphed Colonel Potter of the situation. Advise Captain McNally to return at once to this side of the river. Inform him that you are directed not to support him in any way while he remains on Mexican territory. If McNally is attacked by Mexican forces on the Mexican soil, do not render him any assistance. Let me know if McNally acts on this advice. When McNally received the telegram, he read it carefully, and he gave a curt response. The answer is no. At sundown, the next telegram arrived. Major Alexander commanding. Secretary of War William W. Belknap orders you to demand McNally return at once to Texas. Do not support him in any manner. Inform the Secretary if McNally acts on these orders and returns to Texas. Signed, Colonel Potter. Now McNally quickly wrote his famous reply. Near Las Cuevas, Mexico, November 19, 1875. I shall remain in Mexico with my rangers and cross back at my discretion. Give my compliments to the Secretary of War and tell him and his United States soldiers to go to hell. Signed, Lee H. McNally, Commander. Following morning, McNally made his intentions clear. Per the truce agreement, McNally promised to give 1 hour's notice before commencing an attack. And we told the Mexican authorities that unless the cattle were sent back to the U.S. and the thieves were sent back for prosecution, he would attack. The Mexicans backed down and agreed to McNally's terms. They would return the cattle the following day. Now McNally and his rangers crossed back the river, crossed back over the river. Now there are a number of different accounts of what happened the following day. The one I tend to believe, because it just seems to fit the character of Leander McNally, goes something like this. The next morning, McNally and 10 rangers crossed the Rio Grande at Camargo, Mexico, where the stolen cattle were supposed to be returned. They marched up the riverbank to the customs house and demanded the cattle. When the Mexican captain stalled by politely saying they didn't do business on Sunday, McNally promptly took the Mexican captain prisoner, then hauled him to the Texas side of the border. He then told the Mexican leaders to get the cattle started back to the U.S. side within 1 hour, or he would die. Now the operation was successful, and instead of 250 head returning to Texas, more than 400 were crossed back. Now, due to his extra-legal means in dealing with the cattle rustlers and the bandits along with suffering from tuberculosis, McNally had to retire from the Texas Rangers in 1876. Unfortunately, Captain Leander McNally, a legend of the Texas Rangers, passed away 1 year later. So, what have we learned from this slice of history? Well, it seems you can tell the federal government to go to hell and get away with it. Also, when dealing with a foreign official who does not honor agreements, the threat of imminent death does seem to change minds rather quickly. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below. And most importantly, share this video with your friends. Thank you for taking the time to watch.